And basically, the third set of appendages are jaw-like structures used in feeding. The mouth lies right behind these appendages, and these are called the mandibles. So just like your lower jaw is called a mandible, these guys, jaw-like appendages, are the mandibles. And so let's get to the myriapods. So the myriapods have two major groups within them. The millipedes down here and the centipedes up here. I'll talk about those in turn. But in this general class, we see a couple things. One thing is the cuticle. The cuticle is the outer part of the exoskeleton. It's not waxy. And wax, the beauty of it is it's not permeable to water. It's a fatty substance. It's hydrophobic. Water beads up on it, and it can't go through it. And so basically, terrestrial insects cover themselves with a waxy substance so they don't have a lot of water loss. The myriapods have never evolved a good moisture barrier. And so they tend to be most abundant in damp habitats. In some cases, you can find some things that live in deserts, but they tend to only be really active when there's some moisture around, and often dig burrows so they can get down to where there's more subterranean moisture. And so one of the things they tend to all have is repugnatorial glands. They're repugnant glands. They are disgusting glands. Basically, they release nasty smelling chemicals. And so often they're chemically defended, sometimes in a variety of ways. They lack compound eyes. They may have eyes. In some cases, they're blind. So there are blind centipedes and blind millipedes, but often they have eyes. In some cases, the eyes are fairly big. But they're never compound eyes. And when I talk about the insects, we'll talk about compound eyes in detail. If you look at the head of a myriapode, it's kind of a typical mandibulata head where you've got one pair of antennae, you've got a pair of mandibles, and then also you've got a pair of maxillipeds that are in fairly close proximity. And when we talk about the centipedes, we'll talk about how they've evolved basically venom glands and are a nasty pinching venom injecting structure. Here you can see the mandibles back here on this guy, and then back behind the maxilli. The maxilli are associated with the feeding, and so these guys, you've got short maxilli here and then longer maxillipeds. Some people actually say these are walking legs and a modified first pair of walking legs. We're not going to get into a discussion about how they're best classified. So, two orders. The Chilopoda, which basically is like 100-leggers, and then the Diplopoda are millipedes, and we call them Diplopoda for the fact that they have, for each body segment, two sets of legs, two pairs of legs per body segment. In things like centipedes, the Chilopoda, you have a single pair of legs on each segment. And that's kind of the typical thing. If you think about the annelids, the polychaetes, right? They have parapodia, one pair per body segment. If you think about some of the other animals we talked about that are segmented, they have one pair of appendages per segment. So it's unusual to see this Diplopoda situation, but I'll talk about that and show some pictures in a second here. But let's start with the order Chilopoda. They're successful predators on land. There's 3,000 species. They often live on forest floors where it's damp. So that says moist environments or burrows. So if you find them in a dry area, they're probably down in burrows most of the time. They're terrestrial. A few centipedes actually hang out on rocky shores and salt marshes and things, so are somewhat marine. They're always carnivorous, so they're always capturing smaller animals. And some of these centipedes get huge. If you go online and look at centipedes, you'll see 6-inch, 12-inch long centipedes doing things like attacking and eating mice or snakes. They get big and really nasty. If you look at these legs, you can see there's a series of identical legs. This back here is the back end. This are the legs associated with the hind segments that act kind of like little antennae back there. But this thickened structure up here is one of these poison fangs, and then you've got antennae sticking off in either direction. And so this is a big Florida species, Hemiscolopendra marginata. So if you look at these guys, they have lots of segments, at least 15, maybe more. They're typically nocturnal. The vast majority of centipedes only come out at night, or if they're active in the daytime, it's because they're down in their burrow systems being active or buried under leaf litter being active. And so it's interesting that these things inject a powerful poison. Nowhere in the world is there a centipede that really can endanger a human in terms of life, typically, unless you were, say, allergic to them. But many of them can inject a lot of venom, and it's a really painful bite. Okay, so here is the other order within the myriapods. These are the Diplopoda, the millipedes. And if you look at millipedes, they have huge numbers of segments, huge numbers of legs, and it's too hard to count on this guy, but each body segment, you can see these annulations, each body segment has 2 legs associated with it. Typically speaking, they're found in land environments, moist environments, and they tend to be really slow moving. When they're threatened, they do the armadillo thing where they curl up and protect their soft underside. They tend to have a pretty hard exoskeleton. That has some calcification in it, so they're pretty crunchy and can be hard to eat, particularly if they're all balled up like this. And if you've ever picked up millipedes, you can pick them up. They don't bite like a centipede would. If you're going to pick up one of these things, make sure you understand the difference between millipedes and centipedes. But if you pick one up and then smell your hands, they really stink. Most of them have good chemical defenses so that things don't like to eat them because they smell so bad and taste so bad. One of the things about all these short legs is that they can actually generate a surprising amount of force. They often kind of bore through leaf litter or even soil and find good things to eat like fungus or decaying bits of vegetation, dead insects or whatever. So they're deposit feeders. They're feeding on things laying often on the forest floor or the things that they find under bark in a rotting log in habitats like that. So we're going to switch gears here and move off the myriapods and talk about the next group of mandibulates. And this is a superclass. And so remember, in the arthropods, you've got so much diversity, you end up having phyla, subphyla, superclasses, classes, orders, and there's superorders and suborders. When you have literally hundreds of thousands of species, you need lots of different taxonomic levels to kind of say what these different groups are. And so the hexapods, people often just go right to insect from hexapod. In older textbook versions, you'll see that done. It used to be that we just talked about the class Insecta. But now we realize that there's 2 really different groups within the hexapods. And one involves the class Entonatha. And Entonatha basically means kind of like hidden mouth parts. And it's because their mouth parts are hidden in a little pouch up here on their head. The most common group in this class are the springtails. And so these things look like insects in a lot of ways, but they never have any wing buds or wings. They've got this peculiar structure here. It's a long projection that they typically carry tucked under the body. And this is basically their spring. They call them springtails because they put the spring under the body, and if they're threatened, they push down against the substrate very rapidly with it and vault themselves into the air. They're basically really good at jumping using this structure right here and the muscular attachments. And these things are super abundant in a lot of terrestrial environments. If you look at leaf litter, these are quite likely the most abundant animal you see. And they form the basis of a lot of woodland